Hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia, and I am very pleased to introduce my guest today. I have with me journalist, author. Um, uh, I went with author and journalist before columnist because he also writes some fascinating, fantastic columns. Because here we are about to talk about his journalist and author avatar, Rahul Pandita. Hi, Rahul. How are you doing? Welcome to Mind Podcast.
Thanks, Aditya. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, there are about a million things to talk about in this world, but lately I have been, over the last week or so, immersed in Rahul's latest book, The Lover Boy of Bahawalpur. He's previously written Our Moon Has Blood Clots and Hello Buster, two best-selling books, but this one that came out, I think, 2 months ago or 3 months ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Just about a month back, yes.
Just about a month back. Okay. This post-pandemic, the timelines are all meshed up in my head. So I didn't know it was a month. It's about the Pulwama attacks and the aftermath of it, and how the case was cracked, and how a bunch of determined officers, essentially, and through a sort of a mesh of some intriguing coincidences and some terrific police work, the case was cracked. So before I get into the details of the book, it's a terrific book, Rahul. It's a page turner. And so what prompted you to write this story? Because in the world of 24/7 news, we are reacting to everything real time, including writing columns, pieces, tweets, and so forth. So sometimes taking a step back a year, 2 years later, and reevaluating the events almost becomes impossible in this day and age. So what prompted you?
Other thing, in the older days, we used to lament about the fact that there is too little news around. Now, with the advent of internet and social media, etc., the biggest grudge I hear from readers all over the world, actually, specifically in India, is that there's too much info around, but they don't know what to do with it, and they don't know how to process it. There are two things why this grudge is there. Number one is that in the post-truth world, as they call it, people do not know what to trust, because there's too much information, and most of it does not come from authentic sources. So the authenticity, whether it is true or not, always remains a problem. Number one. Number two, in my experience, what also happens is that at the end of the day, your readers who are concerned about what is happening around there in the world also want it to be presented in a form which is also entertaining, right? So, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest grudge I have had with journalism, specifically in India, is that there's too little good writing. Now, I don't want to be immodest here and say that I'm a good writer, but at least, you put in some effort to be a decent storyteller. I call myself a student of India. Sometimes when some of my mentors introduce me to their students and say, "Oh, he's someone who's traveled through the length and breadth of this country and he's an expert of India," I say, "No, nobody can be an expert of this country. I'm just a student of this country, and and there are some personal stakes I have in this country, especially in Kashmir, etc." So you follow news coming from conflict areas, especially from Kashmir, on a day-to-day basis. And I was following this case right from the day zero, basically, when the attack happens on February 14, 2019. And a few weeks later, after the incident happened, I was traveling through Pulwama in South Kashmir with the team of the Indian Army, and it had some people from the military intelligence who were a part of the response team that was the first to reach the spot minutes after the incident took place. So they told me something which fascinated and terrified me at the same time. When the blast happened, the impact of the blast was so severe that they found the bodies of 4 paramilitary soldiers. 40 died. 40 died in this particular suicide attack. Dangling on the other side of the road. It's a wide double road over a hillock on a couple of communication towers. So then, around that point in time, the story became personal for me. because my attempt as a journalist, as a storyteller, also is to put faces beyond these statistics. Usually, you hear 40 people have died, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So that is why, for the first time, when I kind of became interested in the story and uh, began to follow it more diligently.
So just to add here, so a lot of people, when a lot of people forget, it's almost 30 feet away, 30 or maybe a little more than 30 feet away is where some the bodies were found, right?
Yeah,
If I
absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I mean, guys, just like take a pause and think about it. Like if something happened and then a part of a body is lying 30. I mean, this is not to gross you guys out, but that just tells you the impact of this, what is going on and stuff like that. So that is sort of that is the crux of the matter, right? But you start with a very interesting bit, which, and I don't want to reveal a lot of what you say in the book right now because I want people to go and read it and then come and comment and troll both of us in the comment section saying "हमने इसकी बात क्यों नहीं की?" But you talk about, it starts with the man with shaky hands. It's basically, he's not, his voice is being scrubbed over, the video that comes out is very shaky and stuff. So from there you take out to the point where such an impactful blast happened. So in a weird sort of way, you have this one sort of guy pulling the strings and only they know what is going to happen, and there is a lot of sort of confusion amongst the people on the ground as well about what ultimately is going to happen. And you allude to a lot of other attacks that are going to happen but were foiled and so forth. So as a journalist, when you look at this, what does that tell you? Is there sort of a disconnect, or is there some sort of a complete has the forces actually sort of made such gaping holes or made such advances that sort of their communication structure has been sort of messed up as well since?
I think it's a big challenge for intelligence agencies, for security agencies operating in Kashmir. Um, and around this time, this is February 2019. There are, there is news floating in intelligence. There's some chatter about the possibility of an attack, etc. But in a place like Kashmir, it happens all the time. Uh, so the intelligence has to be really divided into two kinds of things. One is a very general sort of intelligence. The kind of intelligence the Delhi police receives or the intelligence bureau receives in Delhi on, say, India's Republic Day or India's Independence Day. That Islamist extremists are planning something. That's a very general sort of intelligence. And then you have intelligence, which in intelligence parlance is called actionable intelligence, right? Where you have absolutely specific information about the fact that, okay, there are three young men hiding in this house and they are up to something. They've got aluminum powder, they're buying shoes, they're buying knives. So something is happening and they have a car parked, in the courtyard. So that is actionable intelligence. But in this case, unfortunately, there was no actionable intelligence.
Correct.
And, Jash being Jash, that is one advantage Jash has over other militant groups, especially the local militant groups like Hizbul Mujahideen, etc. Because the masterminds, they are trained in the best facilities of Jash or Al Qaeda or Taliban in Pakistan or in Afghanistan. In this case, the mastermind was trained in one of the best facilities in Sangin camp in Helmand province of Afghanistan. So these guys are trained for this stuff. So when the mastermind comes to Kashmir, his first task is to identify an emotional man who's already radicalized, but is radicalized further. Because after all, it's very difficult to convince someone that he has to drive this car and then press a button and then it will blow him up too. And that is what happens. The best of the people get nervous at the last time. They have double thoughts.
Right.
But that is what
that is what this is, right? So
is all about.
And then and you write in the chapter "The Army of Muhammad" about Jaish e Muhammad in 1989, when the intelligence agencies were sending inputs to the then Chief Minister Farooq Abdullah, who was upon being asked about the blast and the killings of Kashmiri Hindus, was saying that there was no militancy, right? So the denial about Jaish happened in 1989. Clearly, we have moved very, very far beyond that, and now Jaish is probably, along with the Hizbul and the other sort of organizations, the two major challenges for the security forces. But in a weird sort of way, you mentioned a camp in Afghanistan. I think we are almost facing a similar situation in Afghanistan again, and that just means that the challenges for our security forces are probably tenfold than what they were probably 5 years ago as well. Would you say that's the case right now as well?
Well, in this case, the Jaish is formed a little later after Masood Azhar is released.
Correct.
From
Okay, I'll clarify. No, I was talking about the elements that formed the Jaish. The same elements were active in 1989, but in a different format.
Yes, in a different format, in the form of Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, and then Rural Mujahideen, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Well, it's a challenge. It's a challenge looking at the developments in Afghanistan, and now there will be a lot of rogue forces who will be kind of diverted towards India. But I think we have faced this eventuality several times, at least in the last 11, 12 years. I remember doing a story from Kashmir in 2009 when some elements of Taliban, it's a very vague territory also, sometimes were arrested in North Kashmir, and they were interrogated and so on and so forth. But we must also remember that in that sense India is a strong state, and it's not Kashmir will not fall like Kabul in that sense.
Absolutely.
So some elements will happen. Maybe there will be some increase in infiltration. The people will be better trained. Obviously, some casualties will happen, and they will do some damage. But in my view, it's not something which the Indian state cannot handle right now.
Absolutely. Okay. So our one contemporary detour is over. So going back to the 2019 timeline, you mentioned that the investigation agencies, a car was very certain, very essential. That's what kicked everything off, right? So it's odd what cars do, because if a lot of people might not remember, but 1993 Mumbai bomb blast, it was a car essentially that led to the whole sort of conspiracy unraveling and stuff. So in many ways, the more things change, they remain the same, 30 years apart. When you talk about intelligence officers, we almost find that there are multiple agencies also at work here. So you have the Jammu and Kashmir police, you have the national agencies, and so forth. And it was such a time that everyone was trying to, do this as rapidly as possible. And then post the Pulwama, you had the Balakot strikes, right? So you mentioned in your book that even on the other side of Pakistan, in Pakistan, there was a recalibration that was, after the Balakot happened, let's not accelerate post Pulwama. So you think that has sort of changed how policing will be done too, and so forth? Because if everyone sort of took a back seat and went to the back, that becomes a challenge for the police as well, for the security forces as well, to get and fish out the perpetrators post sort of.
Well, this remains a constant challenge. I think both sides learn from their mistakes. In this case, for example, the lot of hard work is involved. Of course, the National Investigation Agency and the Jammu and Kashmir Police. The officers, some of the best I've known in my 20 years of experience as a conflict reporter. Very, very efficient officers, and a lot of hard work goes into it. But sometimes luck also favors it.
Yes.
And there's this mistake which the mastermind Umar Khalid, who is the nephew of Jaish's founder Masood Azhar, he commits that mistake. He does not kind of, I don't want to reveal much. So,
Exactly.
given
You
so
don't know what
Rahul,
it's such a challenge that because I have notes in on my Kindle, so I'm trying not to reveal and speaking around them.
yeah, it's a constant challenge. So he commits one mistake,
Yeah.
and I'm sure in future they will not commit such mistakes again. Which ultimately, it's that one mistake which unravels the entire operation, the entire conspiracy behind the suicide attack. So it's an ongoing process,
So what's
really.
another fascinating bit I found in the book was Balwal's interrogation of a key suspect, which reveals to a huge revelation, about the person in the Sindhi Ajrak topi. Again, not saying much because that you reveal the Sindhi Ajrak topi in the first chapter itself. But it starts by him meeting a complete radical, and he decides that a approach to and typically you find people making the conclusion that boss, he's radicalized, so you have to almost clamp down, and rather than that he starts with food, and that's what ultimately breaks him in the end, right? So you also found, because interrogation is, I mean, as anyone who's spoken to security forces or traveled, done conflict reporting, they always say it's a patient game of patience. It's about who breaks first, the guy interrogating or the guy being interrogated. And so it's interesting that they actually chose this approach when there was a lot of pressure, to get results fast and stuff, and that leads them to the whole truck situation, with the again, not revealing much, but where, so that's a bit of luck, and here is a bit of technique, right? So when you talk to officers, and I'm not telling you to reveal the names of who you talk to, but what do you reckon, their perspective was on all this? How did they sort of reconcile with everything, the facts?
See, it depends on situation to situation. And,
Yeah.
in this case, Rakesh is a very experienced,
Mhm.
very efficient officer. He's from the Manipur cadre of the Indian
Mhm.
Police
Mhm.
Service,
Mhm.
and has dealt with some really high-profile cases in the Northeast. Right. So,
Correct.
he's aware. He's a well-read guy.
Mhm.
He's aware of things around him. He's aware of torture techniques.
Mhm.
He's aware of interrogation techniques. He's not someone who likes to adopt a desi approach to things. Like in some police station in Uttar Pradesh, you just hit a person and say, "Oh, sab kuch bol do." He's not that
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah.
He's a learned man. So in his experience, he knows that in cases like these where there's an emotional element involved,
Mhm.
let's
Mhm.
I mean, let's not have any qualms about the fact, and let's not have any vagueness about the fact that Shakir Bashir is a radicalized guy. But he also comes to this radicalization from an emotional point of view, because for him, the concept of jihad is everything.
Mhm.
He's not into womanizing. He's not into the so-called jihad for making money. He's not
Mhm.
into it for
Yeah.
the game of power.
Mhm.
And Rakesh, very initially in the beginning for integration, realizes this.
Mhm. Mhm.
So in his case, he adopts a different technique,
Mhm.
and that technique, it's a kind of debate that happens
Mhm.
between the terrorist sympathizer, between the ground worker, and the officer who is interrogating him. And
Mhm.
ultimately it bears fruit. As you said, it requires a lot of patience,
Mhm.
but ultimately it bears fruit, and many facets of the investigation come to fore.
Come to fore, absolutely. And what I thought was interesting was that when you talk about the Jaish, one of the most important things was crossing the border and the whole tunnel situation that's happening in Jammu and Kashmir. Not a whole lot has been written before about these. I mean, it's a well-known fact amongst various security, fanatics, as I call it. I'm not saying forces, but a lot of us who actually keep tabs of what is happening, what is the latest. कहीं कहीं पेपर में रिपोर्ट्स आते रहते हैं, but not a whole lot is explored. What is interesting is the kind of people that were transported, right? Because the people that were being transported were hardcore Jaish terrorists, but network of people in Jammu, Punjab, and Kashmir were not really hardcore terrorists. A few of them, like were talking. The guy you were talking about, who's the brother of seven sisters. Again, not taking name. He had a very liberal view, and from there to going where he is. So it's almost that this network has been with people whom we have not heard of before, or who have only popped up in the last 10 years. They're all post 1990 kids, because 1990s were a huge inflection point in Kashmir, not only with the Kashmiri Hindus and what happened in 1989 and 1990, but also with the 1996 elections and so forth, and a different normalcy. So do you think that we're dealing with a very different sort of beast, so to speak, with a very post radicalized generation?
It is definitely a different beast, Adit, I must tell you, because the people who got attracted to militancy, to terrorism in 1990 were a completely different people. Many of them were rogue elements within the Kashmiri society. They were radicalized, but they were not as radicalized as the current generation of people are. And in my experience, what is very worrying is that these people, the younger ones, have a very definitive image of what radical Islam is all about. That is something which, in my experience, I found missing among the older generation of militants of the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front or Hizbul Mujahideen. Of course, they were very clear about some things like the Kashmiri Hindus have to be expelled, for example, and they have to use some Islamic slogans, and they have to rally around
renaming of places. I mean,
this book.
हाँ अभी 2 दिन पहले no renaming of places. Shankaracharya Hill. अभी 2 days ago there was a controversy on Twitter where it was called Takht Suleiman by an officer.
Well, Takht Suleiman also has been the name has been in circulation for a long, long time.
No, but I'm saying that was a sort of a prevailing idea. I'm not saying in the 80s, and those were the sort of things that they would talk about, rather than now, which is about ISIS and global Islamist terrorism. That's what I'm saying.
So these people, the youngsters have a very definite idea about Islam, and that is why you see. Pakistan realizes that, and Pakistan wants to cash it. So, when a senior journalist friend of mine read this book, he said that his main takeaway from the book was that Jash only uses commanders who come from Pakistan. The rest of the force, on the ground are Kashmiri boys, and he's absolutely right. Right, so you get these commanders who are very well trained, and they have the capability of someone like Umar Farooq, for example. He's an expert in explosive making. He knows anti-drone technology, anti-aircraft. He can operate an anti-aircraft gun, but he also has something else which is very important from the militant point of view. He has the gift of the gab. He can speak very fluently in Urdu, Dari, Pashto. He can motivate people like Shakir Bashir or Adil Ahmed Dar to give their lives really for the cause of Islam. So a man like this, a man like Masood Azhar, is far more dangerous than a petty militant commander like Burhan Wani, who's there, who's barely trained, and is roaming around with a band of teenage boys with an AK-47 rifle, and he can barely fire it. It's easy to fire an AK-47 rifle and just point and kill a few people, but it takes a lot of training to be someone like Masood Azhar or his nephew Umar.
So I mean that's the difference, where the security force might not, if some terrorist who doesn't know the planning thing, if he's killed in an encounter, the security forces wouldn't mind, but someone like a Masood Azhar, they almost would want to capture alive, and see. But and that also brings us to another interesting character who you mentioned, Hanjila Jihadi, Samir Ahmed Dar, right? The fact is, he's very high up in the Jaish hierarchy, but that fellow is just 22, right? So you are finding a lot of young sort of boys moving up very fast in the Jaish hierarchy. in the 40s almost seems, of course, granted that a lot of the Jaish terrorists have been taken out by the security forces, so that situation is also there. But it almost seems like a lot of young, like between teen boys and 20-year-old boys, suddenly are being attracted to Jaish. Now, is the only way now to sort of address the elephant in the room, sort of saying that, boss, this is not going to be solved just by negotiations and stuff. This, you will just have to police them out. There is just no other way around it. Or is it like a mixture of both that's required?
That's why I keep on debating that, after 30 years of fighting militants in Kashmir, the end goal of counterinsurgency doctrine in Kashmir cannot be the fact that you're eliminating X number of militants every month.
Correct.
You must have seen security agents. The police does its own press conferences, the army does its own press conferences, the CRPF does its own press conferences, and they say that between September and March you've killed X number of militants, etc. Now, killing armored militants who kill a number of civilians and perpetrate these attacks upon security forces, killing them is a must. But that cannot be the end goal of the counterinsurgency doctrine in Jammu and Kashmir. And I think, the current government is realizing it, albeit a little slowly, but, I think the understanding is there. So in my opinion, the success of the counterinsurgency doctrine would be, in this book, for example, there's a character called Fazul Islam. Now, Fazul Islam, he's a 17, 18-year-old boy who is far away from the radical streets of Pulwama. He belongs to an affluent family, lives in a very affluent part of in a very affluent locality in Srinagar.
I mean, the fact that an Amazon account,
as an Amazon account, and the Jaish reaches him. So I think, in my view, the ultimate success of the counterinsurgency doctrine in Kashmir would be that the Indian state reaches someone like Fazul Islam before someone from the Jaish does. And when that happens, I think you will see that 95% of the problem, regarding terrorism in Kashmir will be automatically solved.
Yeah, and what you said is very important, that Fazul actually comes from a very affluent sort of part of Kashmir. So it's not the economic problem that a few Western scribes want to believe, because the West loves poverty porn. So all they do is write about economics as
nothing can be far from truth in Kashmir's case.
Exactly. So, but I mean, everyone who's been in India or has read about Kashmir knows the fact that if this was an economic problem, what happened in 1990s, wouldn't have happened, because it happened actually. A lot of people who were very economically well off were leading sort of the charge, against the Kashmiri Hindus. So.
Absolutely.
So that is the thing. But in coming to the last 10-15 minutes of our discussion, if I do like a 360-degree view of this, right? Because you mentioned the almost we can define as Indian counterinsurgency pre-Pulwama and then post-Pulwama, because I don't think anything like this was expected, because the number of attacks of the scale had gone down significantly. You had 40 CRPF commandos that were, and I'm grateful that you actually write about the commandos as well. As painful as it was to read, it gives you a different perspective when you put a face to the tragedy. Right, because otherwise, like you said, headline hi ho jata hai. If it's one or two, you actually know their names. If it's 40, it's a name in a big infographic or a list that goes around on WhatsApp, with people writing messages saying remember them and things like that, and it gets forgotten. Right. So, do you see a change in the approach of the Indian state post? I wouldn't even say Indian state, Indian agencies post Pulwama.
I think the incident of Pulwama, the attack on Pulwama, where these 40 CRPF personnel died, is a watershed moment in the history of India, really, because the way you deal with counterinsurgency in Kashmir may not have changed as much, but other things have changed. India's response to such terror attack changed on the evening of Pulwama, when the Prime Minister and some of his colleagues took a decision, I can tell you, the same evening to strike at the heart of Pakistan. So, in that sense, a Rubicon was crossed on that particular evening, and
Correct.
and that particular incident also, in many ways, laid the foundation stone for the abrogation of Article 370 a
Correct.
few months later. Now, my
Yeah.
and how has it changed? It has changed in the sense that no matter which government comes to power in New Delhi in 2024 or 29 and so on and so forth, if a similar terror attack happens anywhere in India, any government will be forced to at least measure up to this particular strike, if not more. Now, this
Right.
has become the new yardstick. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, this is a very significant change in
Yeah.
India's response to such terror attacks. Something which should have happened long time back, but did not happen because of reasons we know well. I mean, it should have definitely happened after the 2008 Mumbai attacks, for example, and
Absolutely.
many other times. After India's parliament attack on India's
Parliament attack.
parliament in
Yeah.
2001, but it did not happen, because of a certain weakness, because of a certain lack of focus. Now this has happened. Now we can debate what happened in Balakot, what actual damage it did, but it did damage enough for militant organizations like Jaish to realize, as I say in the book, that नुकसान उतना ही करना चाहिए जितना
जितना
दुश्मन इन इंडिया को
या
उठाने का बर्दाश्त कर सके. उसके
बर्दाश्त कर
beyond,
सकते.
these guys will retaliate, and that will not augur well for us.
And India has had there has been a senior officer once who told me that India has had a history of being very tolerant, or being very sort of accepting of what has happened. Northeast, there is a whole sort of encyclopedia that can written about what India did in the Northeast, where not only were the insurgents won over, one of them actually became the CM. And you know how exactly it was done. So no doubt about it. But one very interesting thing I think was a difference from what happened in Uri was where we crossed the line of control. But here we demonstrated the ability that we don't even mind crossing the international border, and I think that's what. So वैसे देखा जाए तो 2019 itself was a huge year in the history of Kashmir, because not only did you have the abrogation of Article 370, but also a clear indication that the 1999 policy where we decided that we would not cross the line of control, not only that, we would not, if we are given, we don't mind giving it back by crossing the international border if it has to be done that way.
I mean, on the line of control, many incidents happen on a day-to-day basis, and we know for sure that the Indian Army has crossed the line of control several times, and they also do it,
Correct.
and so on and so forth. So, Uri surgical strike was also significant, but after a point in time, it just becomes symbolic. You just cross over the line of control and do what you have to do, and then you come back. But this is for the first time when the war is really taken to the heart of Pakistan. Balakot is not on the line of control, really.
Exactly.
It's deep inside, and you employ a certain capability. You deploy fighter planes to really drop this munition on the Jaish facility. There's a symbolic truth attached to it. Because of the history of Balakot, which I mentioned. Yes, when the raw asset really surveys that area. And what happens, and when the officer tells the people in Raw here in New Delhi about this historical significance of Balakot, and then the decision to strike Balakot is sealed inside.
And also the way the asset surveys is fascinating. Also, when you mentioned the nuances that actually that are broadcast to Delhi, because again, without good intelligence and the speed with which. Let's not forget the time between Pulwama and Balakot, given the level of operation, the scale of planning that it must have taken, and for the asset to have surveyed, because ye to hai nahi ki the asset surveyed and these guys just started in 5 hours. I mean, it would have had to have a significant amount of planning. That was quite incredible.
Absolutely, and to move an asset in such short time,
Yeah.
who could give you a real time inputs
Hmm.
on a jazz facility, and then you deploy your fighter planes to drop that
Hmm.
munition. It's really happened for the first time, really.
Absolutely. Okay. So, in conclusion, then, Rahul, so the book, I divide the book into three parts. The first part is obviously you talking about the the background itself, because you spent two chapters which are very important chapters talking about Ghazi Baba and what happened in 2001, 2003, encounters and so forth, because it is very important for people to realize how we went from Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front to Jaish-e-Mohammed to the Hizb and everyone else, having a stake in Kashmir. And that is sort of the story of Kashmir from the 90s to the 2000s, and how it sort of became from from separatism to terrorism to, or maybe it started with terrorism to terrorism Inc., as I call it, because now you have like this consortium of terrorist groups. Uh,
Absolutely.
who actually have counter stakes also, because they themselves have some sort of very if people are familiar with the Mumbai gangster culture, thoda unme bhi aisa hi type of hai, right? But I'm not again undermining what the second part would be, the challenges that the security forces face, and in the last sort of 4 years post 2016 and Uri, how they have changed and how they have been working even closer with Jammu and Kashmir police to sort of mark an operation on two scales, on the global level, on the national level, and the local level, because this has to be a war that has to be won simultaneously. You can't just do local and forget the global picture. And the third part is obviously identifying the elements who are absolutely present in Pakistan, but how high up they are in Pakistan and where they are located in Pakistan. And like you said, Bawalpur and Balakot are not at the border, right? So those that important distinction. Those are my sort of three sort of things about the book, and then the attack just forms sort of a nice thread that can, I shouldn't say nice, but a thread that connects all of them, right? I mean, what is your take on them?
No, I think the other significant take I have from this investigation is that this is perhaps for the first time that a very professional investigation takes place.
Yeah.
Right? In the past, foreign investigation agencies like FBI, for example,
Correct.
have had a grudge or a complaint with Indian intelligence agencies when they would go to them with the evidence, say from the Mumbai terror attacks, etc.
Right.
And they say, oh, first of all, you got this evidence, but why are you telling us? When you
Yeah.
know everything, why are you telling us? Number one. So you have to do what you have to do. Number one,
Hmm. Hmm.
which changes through Balakot. Number one. Number two is sometimes, and I'm just quoting it from the statement of from a source of mine,
Hmm.
who was privy to the time when the National Investigation Agency was established
Hmm.
after the Mumbai attack.
2009. Yeah, 2008. 2009, I think. And was it
Yeah.
done in right in 2008 or 2009? I think I
No,
forget.
2009, yes.
2009. Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So, so the other grudge would be that when you bring these dossiers,
Hmm.
sometimes they read like Wikipedia entry, because you've gathered a lot of information from open sources and then you produce this file and it's so
Hmm.
poorly written, and the investigation is weak. But
Hmm.
for the first time in this case,
Hmm.
the professionalism displayed by the NIA in this case really worked wonders.
Hmm.
And from the car itself, through small players to bigger players, all the dots could be connected to Pakistan, and it happened in a very professional way. Where you could take this dossier and show it to FBI and say, this is how it is. And I think that's another significant change
Hmm.
that took place after Pulwama.
Absolutely. And if you look at, like, for students of journalism or books who have read 1993, what happened, it's actually a miracle that India actually investigated the Bombay blast that they were, because it was actually a few determined officers of the Mumbai police who made it happen. Because nationally, there was nothing, no coordination like what you saw right now. And one could argue that maybe India wasn't prepared for that. But 15 years after 1993 and 2008, we were almost sort of facing the same thing. And ironically, it was some of the same police officers also in charge who were in 1993 as well. So it's,
India has not been prepared for a very, very long time. And
yeah,
that's the, so many bomb blasts taking place and absolutely no investigation. Time and again, hostage situation arising. And, even during the Mumbai terror attacks, you had the National Security Guard, pictures, terrible pictures of them being stuck in a traffic jam, then taken in a civilian bus to the spot. I mean, it made a joke out of us, really.
yeah,
So I think some of those responses needed to be changed. I think some of it has
yeah.
definitely changed in the last few years, and that's a welcome step. But I must say, at least from the Kashmir's perspective, a lot more needs to be done
Yeah.
before it all comes to an end.
Absolutely. Well, the intent is there. Hopefully, the intentions and the actions both are clear, as we say. But thank you very much, Rahul. This has been a terrific discussion. I'm sure we people who read the book are going to say that we didn't cover every part of the book, but that was not the intention, anyways. I want you all to. We have a tradition at my podcast to give recommendations about this. The recommendation this week was of course, to read this book and tell us the feedback about what you thought about it, and maybe ask some questions, and we'll pose some follow-up questions to Rahul, and maybe he'll be happy to answer those as well. So
I will be.
yeah.
It was a pleasure to be in conversation with you, and I look forward to a few more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Guys, please, I have to do this every week. Yaar, वापस मत कराओ. Like us on Facebook, follow, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Twitter. I detest doing this, but my co-founders kill me if I don't. So I have to do it. So आप पहले ही like कर दो, and keep supporting Mind Makers. We'll be back next week with more on Mind Podcast. Till then, it's goodbye. Thanks.